hiking out in the desert down here in Arizona at night, that's for sure. Because, there are literally thousands of unmarked mines out there that people, the government is trying to find them and locate them, but they'll never find all of them. And some of them, they may drop down 10 feet, some of them may drop down 600 feet.
Yeah, and and the problem is the shafts. If you even fell in it halfway and dropped down even 20 feet, you're gone. I mean, you're never going to get out.
Oh, yeah, I've been hiking before, and I said, boy, if something happened to me now, they would never find me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, instant grave. What I didn't like about when I went out, taking ghost town pictures, old buildings, I'd go out like in Nevada, I'd find an old farmhouse that's maybe been empty for about 80, 90 years, and it was still somewhat intact. And I was there with a couple of my boys with me, which I think at the time they were like 16, 17. And I was kind of naive about rattlesnakes. And one of my sons, hey, that looks like a rabbit hole, and started putting a stick in it. It was not, maybe was at one time a rabbit hole, but it was full of snakes. And I tell you, you never seen any kids run as fast as they ran, including me, back to the vehicle.
Yeah, I had some friends come out and visit us from back east, and they were talking about, they went to some tourist site, an outdoor garden type place. And she was telling me, I said, these rattling bushes you have out here fascinate me.
Yeah, rattling bushes.
She said, I've been down real close to see what was making all that rattling noise, and I couldn't see it.
She's lucky she didn't feel it.
Girl, you don't know. But that's part of it. You just, we run into them all the time. I mean, I run into mountain lions, I run into bear, I run into a lot of rattlesnakes. The main thing is just, you just got to be aware. Don't put your foot or your hands any place that you can't see, and just be careful.
Well, yeah, I got educated one time in Nevada again. I saw this old windmill, really rustic, and it was about ready to fall over. And I pulled off on the side of the road, and I had to go down a little embankment there, and it was all desert. And I was so engrossed at wanting to get that picture. And I walked in there about 30 feet, and all of a sudden I heard all that noise. And I looked down, and there's probably about 10, 15 rattlesnakes right by my feet.
Oh,
you talk about somebody, and I did the dumb thing. I did bunny hop and run. And I probably could have got bit, but thank God I didn't.
We need to learn the old Michael Jackson moonwalk backwards.
Yeah, real fast.
I've done that many a time myself.
Well, I tell you, after that, that's when I started going up like the Canadian Rockies and places like that where it was cold and I didn't have to worry about snakes.
Yeah, well, like I said, we're just trying to, you can't avoid them out here. You just try to be aware and be careful. And we haven't had any trouble at all.
Wow, and
it's just part of it. I mean, the lure of the ghost towns and the ghost mines and the places like that is just too strong to resist for us.
I just think of like all the miners, when they were, looking for gold and looking for silver and all that stuff, going into the caves and all the stuff they had to deal with, especially around the 1870s and maybe a little bit before and a little after. I mean, that took a lot of macho to be able to do that. Especially,
we frequently find ourselves saying, those guys were really, really, really tough. If you can imagine whacking away at rock under, a couple hundred feet, a couple of thousand feet underground, day in, day out. It's incredible.
Well, even that, I noticed up in the Canadian Rockies, there was a lot of silver mines, but you know what? It wasn't on ground level. They were like on the side of a mountain. It was pretty much straight up and down. And here's the big hole, where the caves where they, dug them out. And then you sit there and wonder, how did they ever get up there and get down? I mean, I wonder how many of them, actually, I was told that a lot of them actually died just, getting into their, caves, just to, do mining from, falling or whatever.
Oh, yeah, very, very, very dangerous time. In fact, the only, what I would call from the movies, Get Out, the spirit says, get out. The only experience we had that even approaches that level was we were way deep in an old abandoned mine, and we got a message like that, and I was looking at Dwight, and we both had the same feeling. This guy isn't trying to scare us. He's trying to say, this is not a safe place for you people to be. You need to get out of here. And so we snapped our picture and said thank you, and got out quickly.
Oh, wow.
Because we were way back in there.
That sounds like it would have been really very dangerous. I mean, was there still timbers and stuff holding it up?
And you're looking at timbers that are probably 120, 130 years old.
In other words, they were rotted away.
In other words, don't do as we do. Do as we say. Don't do as we do. Don't go down in there.
But isn't that kind of intriguing, though? I mean, when you start exploring stuff, you kind of forget about certain things like called safety. Yeah,
it becomes a fascination. And, again, that's what we keep saying, we have to be aware. Especially in the desert, take more water than you think you're going to need. Once you're halfway through your water, you need to turn back immediately, that sort of thing. Be sure to stop and, take a breath. Don't get overheated, all that kind of stuff. But the lure, the pull of the desert itself is dramatic. But then you throw on top of that, you're standing where Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday stood. You're standing right where Geronimo was kept prisoner. You're standing where Neanderthals or Cro-Magnon hunted, the mammoths. You're standing in their places. You're standing where, the Spanish conquistadors fought Apaches. It's just, it's a lure that we cannot resist.
What type of feelings do you get emotionally and vibes do you get? I mean, I take it you have a medium with you, or maybe she's not a medium. I forgot what you said she was. But
Dwight and Rhonda are intuitive.
Yeah.
They're very sensitive, and I'm not. Although there have been a couple of instances. Excuse me. The run of emotion runs from everything from absolute zero, just like you and I are talking right now. We're having a pleasant conversation, but there's no real emotion attached to it. To there have been times where we have broken down and wept like babies. There's a chapter in the book, I forget what it's called, but we were in Tombstone in an area called Hoptown. It was the old Chinese part of town. And it's the last chapter in the book. It's called Breakout at Hoptown. And it was the old Chinese quarter, and we were in a building that was built in the 70s, but it was built on top of a historic structure that had been torn down. It was an old Chinese store.
Uh-huh.
And we were doing a fundraiser for Wounded Warriors at the time, and we were down in Tombstone, and there's a film crew there from New York, just happened to be there at the same time, and they said, hey, can we follow you guys around? So we had a film crew with us, and then we had about 30 people with us who had donated money to Wounded Warriors to follow around and see what looking at Speaking with Spirits is all about. And this was the last day of the session. It was a weekend-long session, and I tell you, Dwight, Rhonda, and I were just exhausted. We were wiped out, and we had a fellow by the name of Brian Cano. Your listeners are probably aware of him from The Haunted Collector. And Brian was our guest of honor, and we said, Brian, tonight is your show. You take over, you run them through it, you tell them about ghost hunting, speaking with spirits, and let them experiment with the different things, the different tools, and we're going to go back and just kind of rest. So Dwight went in one corner, I went in another corner, and Rhonda went in another corner. And so you had these 30 people watching, and about half a dozen participating in the event there. And they were just simulating what you would call ghost hunting. And I noticed that Rhonda was getting kind of agitated over in the corner. And I looked over to the simulated bar where they were practicing ghost hunting, and something was going on. And they were trying to work a pendulum. Now, I'm a pendulum dowser, and they were experimenting with the pendulum. And they said, "Hey, Dan, can you come up here? I think we're making some kind of contact or something." So I went up there and was working my pendulum.
Okay, now can you explain what that is to the audience, the younger people?
Oh yeah, certainly. If you'll bring me back to the story, because
I will. I'm not
where I'm liable to go.
Oh no, I'm going to bring you back.
As far as the dowsing is concerned, you're familiar with the old guy with the witching stick, the Y-shaped willow stick, looking for water out in the wilderness.
Oh yeah, yes, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I do the same thing. It's called dowsing, and I do it, and I use a weight on a string. And I'm somewhat oversimplifying it, but if you hold the string perpendicular to the ground and you ask a question, if the answer is yes, the pendulum will swing to the right. If the answer is no, it'll swing to the left. And you can say, for example, is there a spirit here? You'll get a yes. Is the spirit a male, yes or no? Female, yes or no? Were you here in the 1880s, yes or no? That sort of thing. That's how it works. And it's a process where you actually connect with a higher power. I don't know how in-depth you want me to go in on this, but it's a way for the human being to connect with a higher power and get answers that are available only through that mechanism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, you can go a little bit more in depth in that.
Okay, well, basically, the pendulum, you've seen a hypnotist hold the watch, watch the watch, watch the watch.
Oh, yes.
Try to hypnotize somebody. It's somewhat like that because your conscious mind is focusing on the pendulum itself, and that frees up your subconscious mind. Now, your subconscious mind is then able to contact the higher power, and you define that higher power however you want to define it, but there is a higher power that you can connect. And you ask the question. The higher power provides the answer to the subconscious. The subconscious then directs the muscles in your hands to spin that pendulum either left or right.
And how accurate have you been with it?
It depends. My rule of thumb is any psychic who tells you they're accurate more than 50 to 60% of the time is probably deluded. So I would say 50 to 60% of the time I'm right, 40 to 50% of the time I'm wrong. What you have to do is just keep working at it until you get consistent answers. If you get 3 or 4 correct answers in 3 different sessions in a row, you're pretty good chances that you're right.
Oh, wow.
But
now,
it depends. Like sometimes, I'll admit it, sometimes I'm 100% right on, and sometimes I'm 100% right off. It just depends.
Now, Dan, when did you actually take that up? How old were you?
Probably when I was about 50. In my book, my first book about this, I call myself a psychic on training wheels. I came to it rather late in life. And I got a strong feeling one time to go find missing children. I just came out of the blue, out of nowhere, and it was overpowering. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not a cop. I'm not a trained policeman. I'm not a private eye. I don't have a license. I'm not trained in any kind of forensic studies. How can I find missing children? And it hit upon me just, try this psychic stuff. So I tried different means, tarot cards and scrying and different things. And finally I saw someone doing a pendulum one time at a bookstore. And I asked the woman about that, and she told me about it. And I said, well, I can do that. So I started practicing the pendulum, and I'm pretty much a self-taught pendulum dowser from there on out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how do people, accept you doing that when you're out there? I mean, dowsing.
Well, it depends. Again, that kind of runs the gamut. I run into people who don't want anything to do with it. I run into people who are fascinated by it. And I run into a lot of people who are skeptical but want to know more.
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up on Whidbey Island when I was really young. Hmm? And my grandfather, that he used, I don't know, he dowsed for looking for water for a well.
Yeah, that's it.
And actually, he came right on it. He said to the guy with the big drill, on the back of his truck, he said, drill here. He drilled here, and there was water.
Well, if you study some of the more esoteric studies of the Vietnam War, you will find that in Vietnam, the soldiers there used dowsing to one, find landmines and also to find the tunnels that the Viet Cong were hiding in. I've seen motion pictures of them in action doing that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's been around for a long time, I'll tell you that.
Thousands of years, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you go back to the West days. I mean, that was how they looked for water. And, they had guys go from town to town, offering their service.
Yeah, you can, I have read, I haven't been to Egypt, but I've read that there are, petroglyphs or hieroglyphics in Egypt that show dowsing.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean,
and I think the first book written on it was written probably, back in the 15 or 1600s, so it's been around forever.
Oh, wow. Now, going back to your story before I interrupted you.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm up there, And we had a young lady who had she was practicing her dowsing. It was her first day. She just bought a